Welcome to the debate. Today, we're looking into the really tragic case of Chloe Bennett, a teacher known, as the material says, for her strength and steadiness, just incredibly meticulous. Yet she was defrauded of £3,000, money meant for her nephews for their generational wealth. The event itself is clear, but how did this failure happen? That's our focus. Was it primarily an internal lapse, driven by her own powerful ambition, or was it really down to the exceptional skill, the efficacy of an external, targeted manipulation?
That really is the heart of it, isn't it? Where did the breakdown occur? Was it Chloe's judgment failing her, or was it the sheer, calculated force applied by Ghazala Din? I'm going to argue quite strongly for the latter, the external manipulation.
And I'll take the position that the failure was fundamentally internal. The source material really emphasizes Chloe's deep personal ambition, this urgent desire she had to provide a foundation stronger, as it says, than the modest salary of a teacher could easily provide. That emotion, I believe, directly overrode her usual cautious, her meticulous nature. She didn't approach this like a typical investment. It was treated almost like a quiet prayer. And it's this deep emotional stake that made her uniquely vulnerable, causing her to get swept along. Critically, she neglected the kind of rigorous due diligence that had, defined her professional life for 20 years. The lapse was internal. It was a failure in guarding her own caution.
I see it differently. Yes, Chloe's desire provided, let's say, the necessary opening, but the success of the fraud, that belongs entirely to Ghazala Din, described aptly as the charmer. Din didn't just, ask for money. She built this seemingly impregnable wall of trust. It started with an introduction through a trusted mutual friend, and she just radiated this air of quiet authority. And crucially, she used sophisticated, almost magnetic jargon talking about compound growth, asset-backed security. This wasn't really about informing Chloe. It was, I think, designed to intimidate, to create an illusion of expertise, making Din seem like the perfect partner for her careful dreams.
Okay, I understand focusing on the language, but doesn't that bring us right back to the core internal failure? You say Ghazala used language Chloe yearned to understand, to neutralize her critical thinking. But surely, someone like Chloe, an expert in her own field, guiding others for 2 decades, should recognize that a stranger's magnetic confidence isn't, a substitute for standard financial checks. Transferring money based only on that confidence, accepting just sleek digital contracts, that's a profound deviation from meticulous behavior, wouldn't you agree? Regardless of how complex the sales pitch sounded.
I'm just not quite convinced there, because I think that minimizes the tactical brilliance of using that complexity. Terms like asset-backed security, they aren't just complex. They signal or seem to signal institutional backing, maybe even regulatory oversight. It makes the actual simple act of transferring money seem almost secondary, like a minor detail compared to the supposed sophistication of the investment itself. Chloe's lapse wasn't, I don't think, a failure of character. It was a moment where she was skillfully maneuvered into feeling that asking basic questions, demanding simple transparency, was somehow beneath the high-level discussion they were having. Her desire wasn't just greed. It was an intellectual ambition to grasp this complex world. And Ghazala absolutely weaponized that virtue.
Well, even if we grant the extraordinary power of that external pitch, the aftermath seems to point back internally. The source material is quite clear. Chloe's ultimate devastation wasn't the money itself. She knew money could be earned again. The real loss, the deep one, was the loss of the certainty she once carried, that she could read people, that her instincts were sound. This profound self-blame, this sustained humiliation, it strongly suggests she holds herself accountable for a failure of her own judgment.
That's a fair point about her suffering. It truly is. But I'd argue that this profound loss of certainty is actually a classic symptom of high-level emotional trauma inflicted by an external force. This was a violation, not just a mistake. Think about it. She keeps the forged documents, described as a cruel monument. That imagery to me demonstrates the wound was inflicted by Ghazala's betrayal. It's a physical, external reminder of the lie she was subjected to. Holding on to those documents isn't just about acknowledging her mistake, it's about acknowledging the brutal external reality of the fraud itself.
But the shadow over her life, the dominant theme, isn't necessarily rage at Ghazala. It's the failure of her own previously reliable guardrails. So the core debate for me remains. The cautious guardian faltered when faced with a deeply personal, emotionally charged goal for her nephew's future.
And I still maintain that the internal desire merely provided the perfectly placed leverage point for an external assault, one so flawlessly calibrated, so tailored to her that its success was perhaps almost inevitable.
So we're left with these two perspectives, one focusing on Chloe's own ambition, creating the vulnerability, the weak point that allowed the disaster in, and the other focusing on the almost unavoidable success of a perfectly designed, externally applied manipulation.
And perhaps the material ultimately shows us that manipulation is often most potent, not when it targets simple greed, but when it cleverly weaponizes a person's most cherished virtues. In this case, Chloe's meticulous planning and her deep, profound devotion to her family. There's clearly more to unpack here about how these external pressures can be so precisely tuned to exploit our fundamental hopes.